You are lying in the dark, eyes closed, ready to drift into sleep. But something feels off. A thought lingers at the edge of your mind, an unease you can't quite name. It starts as a whisper, a question barely formed. What if reality isn't what it seems? What if everything you trust, your memories, your senses, your very sense of self, is nothing more than an illusion carefully constructed to keep you from seeing the truth? Most people brush off such thoughts, dismissing them as meaningless. But what if they're not? What if, buried beneath the surface of everyday life, lies a terrifying contradiction, one so profound that to truly understand it is to risk everything? You think you know what is real. But what happens when reality contradicts itself? Tonight, you are stepping into the unknown, a mental labyrinth where logic collapses, truth devours itself, and nothing can be trusted, not even your own thoughts. Each paradox is a crack in the foundation of reality, a splinter in your understanding. Some will seem harmless at first, almost trivial. But as we descend deeper, the contradictions will tighten, the loops will become inescapable, and soon, you will no longer know where the paradox ends and your own mind begins. You sit in a dimly lit bar, the low hum of conversation filling the air. Glasses clink, laughter echoes, but your mind is elsewhere. You are watching a man at the far end of the room, his fingers wrapped around a half-empty glass of whiskey. He hasn't spoken in hours. He simply stares ahead, lost in thought. And then, without warning, a strange realization creeps into your mind. No matter what, someone in this bar is drinking right now. And if that person is drinking, then, by sheer logic, you can conclude that if they are drinking, then everyone in the bar is drinking. Wait, that can't be right. You sit back, trying to piece it together. The paradox goes like this. There exists a person in the bar such that if that person is drinking, then everyone in the bar is drinking. It seems absurd. How can one person's action dictate reality for everyone else? But the logic is airtight. Consider this. If nobody in the bar is drinking, then the statement is automatically true. Because if-then statements don't require the first part to be true for the whole to hold. It's like saying, if the moon is made of cheese, then I am the King of England. Since the first part isn't true, the statement isn't actually contradicted. But now imagine that someone, anyone, picks up a drink and takes a sip. At that moment, the entire logical construct shifts. Now the statement must still hold. If that person is drinking, then everyone is drinking. But that makes no sense. One person drinking doesn't force everyone else to be drinking. And yet, the logic remains intact. You glance around the bar. People are minding their own business, unaware of the paradox that just unfolded in your mind. But something feels different now. As if reality itself is less stable than you assumed. You were always told that logic is the foundation of truth, that paradoxes are just tricks of language. But what if that's not true? What if contradictions are woven into the very fabric of existence? Your hands grip the table as a strange dizziness overtakes you. How many times have you assumed that logic was guiding you, when in fact, you were simply following a set of rules that break under pressure? And worse, if reality itself allows for paradoxes, what else have you believed that isn't as stable as it seemed? The man at the far end of the bar takes another sip of his drink. You watch closely. Your mind spins with the implications. If he is drinking, then everyone is drinking. But you haven't touched your glass. And yet, the thought lingers, pulling you deeper. Imagine this. You wake up one morning to a knock on your door. Standing there is a stranger in a dark suit, holding a sealed envelope with your name on it. His face is unreadable, his presence unsettling. He hands you the envelope without a word and vanishes before you can ask who he is. You hesitate before opening it. Inside, a single sentence is written in crisp, elegant handwriting. You will open this envelope at exactly 7:42 a.m. Your eyes dart to the clock. 7:42 a.m. You feel a chill crawl up your spine. How could this be possible? Did you really have a choice in opening the envelope? Or were you merely playing your role in a script that had already been written? This is the prediction paradox, a logical trap that shakes the very foundation of free will. The paradox is simple. Suppose a highly intelligent predictor, let's call it an oracle, can foresee your choices with perfect accuracy. The oracle writes down what you will do before you do it. The moment you read the prediction, you are faced with an unsettling dilemma. If you follow the prediction, then it was truly foreseen. But if you deliberately choose to do the opposite, just to prove it wrong, then the oracle must have already predicted that reaction too. You cannot escape. Your mind races. What if the letter had said you would not open it? Would you have resisted just to prove it false? But if that were the case, the oracle would have known, and it would have written something else accordingly. No matter what choice you make, the prediction remains accurate. Your thoughts spiral further. If the oracle had written down what you will do tomorrow, is your future already decided? Could you ever truly act against the prediction? But here's where the paradox deepens. What if you receive two predictions? One stating that you will take an action, and another saying you won't. Which one is true? Can the future be both determined and undetermined at the same time? A terrible realization settles in. If an oracle can predict your every move, then free will is an illusion. Every decision you make is merely an execution of a path that has already been set in stone. The moment you attempt to defy it, you are merely fulfilling the prediction that you would try to defy it. Your hands tremble as you stare at the envelope. A creeping thought whispers in your mind. What if everything you've ever done was already decided? Not by an oracle, not by a letter, but by the invisible machinery of reality itself. You glance at the clock again, 7:43 a.m. The moment has passed. You did exactly as the prediction foretold. Or did you? The thought lingers, pulling you deeper. Imagine this. You and your twin have lived your entire lives together, mirroring each other's thoughts, choices, and actions. But today, that changes. Today, one of you will step onto a spacecraft and leave the Earth behind, traveling to the farthest reaches of the cosmos at nearly the speed of light. The other will stay behind, watching as the ship disappears into the void. At first, the separation feels temporary, a brief adventure in the vastness of space. But something strange is about to happen. Something that will challenge everything you thought you knew about time, motion, and reality itself. Decades pass on Earth. The twin who stayed behind grows old, their body weighed down by time, their face lined with the passage of years. The world changes, loved ones fade away, the sky remains the same, but everything else moves forward. And then one day, the spacecraft returns. The air is heavy with silence as the ship's hatch opens. And then, you step out, young, unchanged, as if time has barely touched you. The world stares in shock. The twin who left has aged only a few years, while the one who stayed behind has become an old man. Two people born in the same moment now stand before each other, separated not by distance, but by time itself. This is the twin paradox, one of the most unsettling consequences of Einstein's theory of relativity. It suggests that time does not flow equally for all observers. Instead, the faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. To the twin aboard the spaceship, the journey felt short, just a handful of years. But to the one left on Earth, decades slipped by. And now a disturbing question looms. Which one of you truly experienced time correctly? The paradox doesn't end here. If motion affects time, then time itself is relative. Every second, every moment, every memory, they are not fixed. The passage of time depends on the observer. But if time can stretch and shrink, then what is the present? If a single event can exist in two different timelines, then does the present even exist at all? Or is it just an illusion, a fleeting shadow of an ever-changing now? You look at your twin, an old man with fading eyes. He looks at you, his reflection frozen in youth. And then a terrible thought strikes. If time is not absolute, then what does it mean to be alive? Are you both the same person you once were? Or have you, in some way, become strangers to each other? Two versions of a self that should have never coexisted. The silence lingers. One of you has traveled through time without ever meaning to. And now, nothing will ever be the same. Imagine a vast, empty universe. No stars, no planets, no matter, just a perfect, endless void. Now, within this void, you place a single point, a single coordinate in space, marking its location with precision. But here's the question. What does that point actually mean? Is it truly there? Or does its existence depend entirely on the space around it? If you remove everything, the galaxies, the planets, the energy, what remains of space itself? This is where things become unsettling. The whole argument, a paradox rooted in Einstein's general relativity, suggests something terrifying. Space and time might not have an independent existence at all. To understand why, imagine a vast, flexible fabric stretched across the cosmos. This is space-time, a four-dimensional continuum that bends and warps under the influence of matter. According to Einstein, this fabric isn't just a background, it's the very thing that dictates motion, gravity, and even time itself. Now, take that fabric and create a hole in it, a region where nothing is defined, no coordinates, no structure, just pure emptiness. What happens to the physics inside that hole? According to classical reasoning, we should be able to determine exactly what exists at every point in space and time. The laws of the universe should be absolute, immutable, predictable. But the whole argument throws a wrench into this assumption. It suggests that two entirely different realities can exist within the same mathematical framework. One version of space-time follows a familiar path. The universe unfolds in a way we expect. But the second version, just as valid, behaves in a way we cannot predict. Here's why that's disturbing. If two different versions of reality can emerge from the same fundamental laws, then what guarantees that our reality is the only one? What if, right now, we exist within one possible version of the universe, while an equally valid yet completely incomprehensible reality lurks beneath the surface? A reality where the very coordinates of existence shift, where identity itself is unstable, where the meaning of here and now isn't fixed, but constantly redefined. If this is true, then what is space really? Is it something real? Something physical? Or is it just a language, a convenient fiction we tell ourselves to make sense of the universe? Perhaps space isn't a thing at all. just a shadow of something deeper, something we're not yet capable of comprehending. But here's the final twist, the most unsettling implication of all. If space and time are not absolute, then what does that say about you? Are you truly here, in this moment? Or are you merely a temporary arrangement of coordinates, a fleeting structure in an ever-shifting reality? If the whole argument is right, then reality is full of gaps, holes that cannot be filled, missing pieces that cannot be defined, and maybe, just maybe, you are one of them. You believe in reason. You believe in logic. You believe that truth can be known, that knowledge is something we can uncover, piece by piece, like a great puzzle finally forming a perfect picture. But what if I told you that every truth you know, every belief you hold, rests on a foundation that is inherently impossible? This is the Münchhausen Trilemma, one of the most devastating paradoxes in epistemology, the study of knowledge. It states something simple, yet profoundly disturbing. There is no solid foundation for any truth. Imagine you're standing on a platform suspended in mid-air, asking, why does this platform stay up? You look down and realize it's resting on another platform. All right, that explains it. But then you ask, what's holding that platform up? And beneath it, yet another, and another, and another, an endless descent into justification that never arrives at anything truly fundamental. No matter how deep you go, you will never find the bottom. This is the heart of the trilemma. Every attempt to justify truth leads to one of three inescapable failures, infinite regression. Every answer requires another answer, forever. No foundation, no stopping point, just an endless chain of explanations that never truly explain anything. Circular reasoning. At some point, you might try to justify a belief using itself. Why is this true? Because it's based on that other, truth. But why is that true? Because it comes from the first truth. Round and round you go, like a snake swallowing its own tail, never truly arriving at knowledge. Axiomatic assumption. Faced with the abyss, most people simply stop questioning. They take something as self-evident, a fundamental truth that needs no further justification. But why does it need no justification? Because you say so. Because it feels right. Because everyone believes it. Here's where things become truly unsettling. No matter what you do, you are trapped in this trilemma. There is no escape. Every scientific fact, every religious belief, every mathematical proof, every philosophical argument, all of it is either infinitely regressive, circular, or ultimately based on blind assumption. That means that knowledge itself, everything we think we know, is built on a foundation of nothing. The trilemma is named after the legendary Baron Münchhausen, who, according to folklore, once found himself sinking into a swamp. To escape, he reached down, grabbed his own bootstraps, and pulled himself up out of the mud. An impossible, absurd act. And yet, every attempt to justify knowledge does exactly that. It pulls itself up by its own logic, creating the illusion of a certainty where none exists. Now, consider the implications. If every truth rests on nothing but assumption, then how can you ever be sure that what you know is real? What if the entire structure of logic itself, the very laws of thought, are just illusions we've created to keep ourselves from falling into the abyss? What if the mind, desperate for stability, has tricked itself into believing in things that have no foundation at all? And what does that say about you? Are you truly here, listening to this? Or are you merely a thought suspended in a void, an idea trying desperately to prove its own existence? only to discover that there is nothing underneath. The Münchhausen Trilemma is not just an intellectual puzzle. It is a trap, a mental labyrinth with no way out. And now that you have entered it, ask yourself one final question. How do you know you will ever escape? Imagine this. You are told that sometime in the future, on a specific Tuesday, you will experience something truly horrifying. Not today, not tomorrow, but one day, a Tuesday, waiting for you in the abyss of time. How do you feel? A normal reaction would be dread, anxiety, perhaps an obsessive need to know which Tuesday. After all, the moment you learn the date, that Tuesday will loom over you like a shadow, invading your thoughts, warping your perception of time itself. But now, let's twist the scenario. What if I told you that it doesn't matter which Tuesday? What if, no matter how far into the future this Tuesday is, it has no emotional impact on you at all? This is Future Tuesday Indifference, a paradox that exposes something deeply disturbing about human psychology. The way we treat the future, the way we discount pain, and the way our minds quietly betray us in the face of time. The paradox is deceptively simple. Imagine you are given a choice. You can experience intense suffering next Tuesday, or you can experience the exact same suffering on some future Tuesday. A Tuesday that is so far away, it feels disconnected from your present self. Logically, there is no difference. Pain is pain. Time is irrelevant. Suffering does not lose intensity just because it is placed further into the calendar. And yet, the moment that suffering is pushed far enough into the future, something strange happens. You stop caring. If the suffering were tomorrow, you'd panic. If it were next week, you'd still be anxious. But make it 10 years from now, or 100, or 1,000, and suddenly you feel nothing. As if that version of you, the one who will one day suffer, is a stranger. This paradox forces us to confront an unsettling truth. The way we perceive time is not rational. We know that future suffering is real. We know that it will happen. But because it is distant, because it does not belong to the present version of ourselves, it feels unreal. This same flaw in human thinking is why people procrastinate, why they make self-destructive choices, why they fail to prepare for disasters, why they ignore inevitable consequences. You eat unhealthy food today, telling yourself you'll be healthy later. You put off work, assuming your future self will handle it. You ignore long-term dangers, climate change, financial collapse, personal health, because the suffering exists in a time that feels disconnected from you. Your brain treats your future self like a different person, a stranger. And because of that, you betray them. But here's the real nightmare of this paradox. If your future suffering doesn't matter to you now, then why should your present suffering matter to your past self? Think about it. If your past self was as indifferent to you as you are to your future self, then who are you right now? A person whose pain was ignored by their past self. A person whose suffering was dismissed long ago. A person who has always been left behind by the ones who came before. You are merely the latest version of someone who keeps delaying the pain, pushing it forward in time, never realizing that the one who will eventually suffer is you. And so, here's the question that lingers in the darkness of this paradox. If the version of you suffering on some future Tuesday is a stranger to you, then what if the version of you right now is a stranger to someone else? A past self who never truly cared, a mind lost in time, abandoned by its own existence. And if that's the case, who are you? And if you can't answer that, then who will? Imagine standing at the edge of an abyss, about to take a step forward. But before you do, something eerie happens. A voice, your own, whispers from the darkness ahead. You have already fallen. This choice is meaningless. You freeze. The air feels heavier now. Because the paradox you are about to confront is one that doesn't just challenge your perception of time and causality, it dismantles the very foundation of free will. This is the consequence paradox. It begins with a simple idea. Everything you do has consequences. Every action ripples outward, shaping the future in ways both obvious and invisible. That much is undeniable. But what if those consequences are already set? What if every action you take, every decision you make, is nothing more than the inevitable unfolding of a chain that was forged long before you even existed? What if the very thing you call choice is just an illusion? Consider this scenario. A scientist builds a machine that can predict human decisions with perfect accuracy. You sit in front of it, and before you even move, it tells you exactly what you are about to do. You laugh, thinking you can outsmart it. You plan to raise your left hand instead of your right, just to prove the machine wrong. But before you even act, the screen already displays your attempt to deceive it. It knew. It always knew. No matter how much you try to rebel, every move, every counter-move, every desperate attempt to break free is already accounted for. So, here is the question that begins to unravel reality. If your actions can be predicted before you even take them, then are you truly making choices? Or are you merely acting out a script, a sequence of events set in motion long before your mind even processed the thought? The paradox only deepens when we expand its implications. Imagine that right now, you are faced with a decision. You can either help someone in need or walk away. Instinctively, you believe this is a free choice, something within your control. But pause. What led you to this moment? Your upbringing, your experiences, the way you were raised, the thoughts that have shaped you, the emotions you feel in this instant. Every fragment of your existence is a consequence of something before it. If every cause has an effect, and every effect becomes the next cause, then where did free will ever begin? And if your decision was shaped by forces beyond your control, then was it ever truly yours? This is the terrifying nature of the consequence paradox. It forces you to confront the possibility that your every action, every word, every thought is simply the result of a chain reaction stretching back to the very birth of the universe. And if that's true, then what does that make you? A puppet of causality, a mere echo of past events playing out in a predetermined sequence. But here is where the paradox turns truly sinister. If every decision is inevitable, if every choice you make was always going to happen, then so is every mistake, every regret, every tragedy. And that means, no matter what you do now, you were always going to end up exactly as you are. No escape, no alternate path, just a relentless march forward, dictated by the forces that came before. So tell me, when you look at your life, at the choices you've made, are you truly the architect of your fate, or are you merely watching it unfold, powerless to change what was always destined to happen? And if you hesitate for even a moment before answering, then you already know the truth. A storm rages through the dense, uncharted swamp. The sky roars with thunder, and the trees tremble as if fearing something unseen. In the heart of the wilderness, a lone traveler, you, walks unknowingly toward fate. Without warning, a bolt of lightning cracks the sky, striking you down in an instant. Your body is obliterated, atomized. reduced to nothing, and yet, something impossible happens. In the very same moment, another lightning bolt strikes nearby. But instead of destruction, it creates life. Out of the swamp's murky depths, from raw molecules and scattered atoms, an exact copy of you emerges, not just in appearance, not just in voice. This swamp man has your thoughts, your memories, your knowledge, your personality. It looks at its hands, at the rain-drenched earth, and it believes, with absolute certainty, that it is you. It remembers your past, the people you love, the choices you made, the regrets that haunt you. And when it walks out of the swamp and returns to your life, not a single person, not your closest friend, not even you, could ever tell the difference. But here is where the paradox begins to twist reality itself. Is this swampman really you, or is it just a perfect illusion? It remembers loving your family, but it never actually met them. It remembers growing up, learning, laughing, crying, but it never truly experienced any of it. It believes it has a past, but its past was never lived. So, what does that make it? And what does that make you? Here's the terrifying question. If everything that defines your identity, your thoughts, your feelings, your memories, can be replicated so perfectly, then what is the real difference between you and someone who thinks they are you? Could you, right now, be nothing more than a swampman, an entity that only believes it has lived a life? How would you ever know? But let's take this one step further. Imagine this isn't just one moment in time. Imagine that, right now, lightning strikes again and again, endlessly recreating you over and over in an infinite cycle. Each time, a perfect copy steps out of the swamp. Each time it continues your life as if nothing ever happened. Would it matter? Would it make any difference if the you of a second ago simply ceased to exist and was replaced by an identical you again and again, forever? And if that's the case, then who or what were you a moment ago, or worse? What if this is already happening? What if every time you close your eyes, even for a blink, the you that opens them is never the same you that closed them? What if consciousness itself is not a continuous thread, but a series of perfect replications, each one believing it has always been here? If that were true, then who is watching through your eyes right now? And more importantly, who will be watching next? Two people sit across from each other in a dimly lit cafe. The air is tense. One of them, let's say it's you, leans forward, voice trembling with conviction. You're in the middle of an argument, one that feels deeply personal, one that matters. The other person, let's call them your opponent, interrupts. Their voice rises, their words spill over yours like a crashing wave, drowning out whatever you were about to say. You try again. You raise your voice to be heard, but so do they. The cafe grows louder, not just from the two of you, but from the background noise, clattering dishes, murmuring conversations, the hum of a distant espresso machine. And then, something strange happens. Neither of you can hear exactly what the other is saying anymore. Words dissolve into a chaotic mess of sounds. But here's the paradox. Even though you can't hear your opponent's argument, you still believe you are winning, and so do they. How? How can both of you be convinced that you're right, even when the very words that shape your reasoning have been lost in the noise? This is the noisy argument paradox. It reveals a disturbing truth about human belief. We don't just listen to arguments, we fill in the gaps. When we can't hear exactly what someone is saying, our minds assume we already know their position. Worse, we assume that position is weak, flawed, or ridiculous. And when we believe an argument is weak, we believe we must be right. Even when we haven't truly listened, even when we haven't understood, even when the argument we're dismissing was never actually spoken. Now let's push this paradox even further. Imagine a debate between two people who speak entirely different languages. They can hear the tone of each other's voices, the urgency, the frustration, but they can't understand a single word. Yet still, both of them walk away, convinced they won. Why? Because to them, every sound coming from the other person's mouth was just noise, and noise can't be persuasive. But here's where it gets terrifying. What if every argument you've ever had, every debate, every disagreement, was never truly based on logic, but on noise? Think about online debates, political arguments, religious disputes, philosophical disagreements. How often do people genuinely hear each other? How often do they listen without interruption, without distortion, without their own biases filling in the gaps? What if every time you think you've won an argument, it's just because you stopped listening at the exact moment your own mind decided you were right? And if that's true, can anyone ever really win an argument? Or are we all just shouting into the void, convincing only ourselves? Imagine a scientist standing in a vast empty field, staring at the sky. He has spent years unraveling the laws of logic, carefully dissecting the structure of reasoning itself. Today, he is contemplating a single, seemingly trivial statement: all ravens are black. It is an innocent claim, one that appears self-evident, and yet, within this simple assertion, lurks a paradox so insidious that it threatens to destabilize our entire understanding of logic. To test this statement scientifically, we might begin by observing ravens. Every black raven we see strengthens our belief that all ravens are black. So far, nothing unusual. But then, a strange twist emerges. According to formal logic, anything that confirms the statement, all ravens are black, must also confirm its logically equivalent statement, everything that is not black is not a raven. This means that when we observe a red apple, a white swan, or a blue car, we are, in some strange way, gathering evidence that all ravens are black. Think about that for a moment. Every non-black object in existence, every green leaf, every golden coin, every drop of crystal clear water, somehow contributes to proving that all ravens are black, simply because they are not ravens. It is as if the entire universe, in its silent indifference, is whispering a truth about ravens in places where ravens do not even exist. At first glance, this seems absurd. How could a red apple possibly tell us anything about the color of ravens? And yet, if we reject this conclusion, we must also reject the very structure of logical reasoning, something we rely on to understand the world. We find ourselves caught in a trap, unable to move forward or backward without tearing apart the very foundations of rational thought. This paradox, first formulated by the philosopher Carl Gustav Hempel in the 20th century, challenges one of the most fundamental ideas in science: how we confirm general laws. If evidence for a universal statement can come from instances that seem completely unrelated to it, then what does it truly mean to know something? Does knowledge come from observation, or does it arise from the way our minds impose patterns on reality? Consider an even darker implication. If every object in the universe provides evidence for every other possible truth, then how can we ever distinguish between true and false? If every non-black object supports the idea that all ravens are black, does every non-white object support the idea that all swans are white? Does every non-false statement support the truth of every other statement? Does reality itself become an unbroken web where everything proves everything else, making contradiction impossible? The mind recoils from this abyss. We cling desperately to the intuition that only direct observation should count as evidence. We want the color of ravens to be determined by ravens themselves, not by apples or oceans or stars. And yet, the iron grip of logic tells us otherwise. But perhaps there is another way out. Some philosophers argue that the paradox only arises because of the way we define confirmation. They suggest that while non-black objects may technically provide some minuscule degree of evidence for all ravens are black, this evidence is so weak that it is practically meaningless. The problem, then, is not with logic itself, but with the way we interpret probabilities in the real world. Yet even this does not fully resolve the unease. For if we accept that non-black objects can confirm all ravens are black in some small way, then we must also accept that a single counterexample, one non-black raven, would shatter the entire statement. This fragile symmetry between confirmation and falsification is the foundation of the scientific method. And yet, if confirmation can come from unexpected places, does falsification truly work the way we assume? At its core, the paradox of the ravens is not just about birds or colors. It is a dagger aimed at the heart of how we derive knowledge. It forces us to ask whether logic and reality are truly aligned, or whether we are simply playing an elaborate game of symbols, mistaking the rules of thought for the fabric of the universe itself. And if the laws of logic can lead us into such strange contradictions, if reason itself can become a maze where truth and absurdity collapse into one another, then what else might we be wrong about? What other paradoxes are waiting in the shadows, ready to pull the ground out from beneath our feet? Imagine a single grain of sand. It is small, insignificant, barely worth noticing. Now, place another beside it, then another, and another. If you keep adding grains, at some point you will have a heap. But here is the question: when exactly does it become a heap? Is it after 10 grains? 100? 1,000? The transformation seems inevitable, yet there is no single, definitive moment where the grains suddenly cross over from not a heap to a heap. This is the Sorites Paradox, an ancient dilemma that stretches logic to its breaking point. It is not about sand. It is about the terrifying ambiguity that lurks at the edges of reality. Consider a different version, a person with a full head of hair. If they lose a single strand, they are still not bald. Losing another does not make them bald either. But if we continue, strand by strand, eventually they must be bald. Yet at no point does one last hair make the difference. The boundary between having hair and being bald vanishes under scrutiny, like a mirage dissolving when approached. This paradox is not just an intellectual puzzle. It is a direct attack on the way we categorize the world. We depend on labels, on concepts, on distinctions. We assume we know when something is hot or cold, alive or dead, rich or poor. But Sorites exposes a deep flaw in this thinking. Most of our categories are built on nothing but convention. There is no moment when a child becomes an adult, when night becomes day, when a few drops of water become a puddle, then a pond, then a lake. Every category we rely on is a fragile illusion, an arbitrary threshold drawn over an unbroken continuum. And yet we must categorize. Without distinctions, we cannot think, cannot speak, cannot function. The paradox traps us in a dilemma. Either we abandon categories altogether, dissolving meaning itself, or we accept that our definitions rest on shaky ground, useful, but ultimately false. But this is where the paradox becomes even more dangerous. If categories are arbitrary, what does that mean for moral and ethical decisions? If a single act of dishonesty does not make someone a liar, then when do they become one? If one minor injustice does not make a system corrupt, then when does it cross the line? There is no clear moment, no exact point, only a gradual erosion. And yet, step by step, the world changes. The Sorites Paradox reveals a chilling truth. Most transformations happen without us noticing. Democracy does not collapse overnight. It erodes, one small compromise at a time. A civilization does not fall in a single day. It decays, piece by piece, while no one notices until it is too late. Even identity itself is vulnerable. Who we are changes gradually, thought by thought, choice by choice. But there is never a single moment when we become someone else. The mind resists this conclusion. It demands a point, a moment, a line that separates one state from another. But the paradox denies us that certainty. It leaves us lost in a shifting landscape where categories melt into one another, where definitions slip through our fingers like grains of sand. And if nothing has a definite boundary, then what is real? What can we trust? Are we merely drawing imaginary lines over an unbroken, infinite spectrum? And if so, is truth itself just another illusion? One more fragile heap of sand waiting to be blown away by the wind? Imagine an ancient ship, the legendary vessel of Theseus. It has sailed for generations, braving the wrath of the sea, carrying warriors and kings across the vast, unyielding waters. But time is relentless. The wooden planks decay one by one, and each is replaced. The mast, the sails, the oars, every single part is gradually substituted for a new one, until not a single original piece remains. And now, a question lingers like a spectre in the fog. Is it still the same ship? This is the ship of Theseus Paradox, an enigma that tears at the very fabric of identity. A whisper from the abyss that asks, what makes something what it is? At first, the answer seems simple. Yes, it is the same ship. Its form remains unchanged, its function intact. The world continues to recognize it as the ship of Theseus. But then, the paradox sharpens its blade. Imagine that someone has carefully preserved every original piece of wood, every worn sail, every rusted nail, and painstakingly reconstructs them into a second ship, an exact replica of the vessel as it once was. Now the question twists like a knife. Which is the real ship of Theseus? Is it the ship that gradually evolved, the one that never stopped sailing? Or is it the one made from the original materials, now restored to its former self? If identity is in the material, then the restored ship must be the true one. But if identity is in continuity, in the unbroken thread of existence, then the ship that remained at sea is the true Theseus. The paradox does not stop at ships. It reaches into the depths of human identity, into the terrifying fragility of the self. Consider your body. Every 7 years, nearly all the cells in your body have been replaced. You are not made of the same physical substance as the person you once were, and yet you are still you. Or are you? What if, just like the ship of Theseus, every thought, every belief, every value you once held had changed? Are you still the same person if your mind, not just your body, has been replaced over time? The person you were as a child, the person you were a decade ago, do they still exist? Or are they ghosts, echoes of a self that no longer is? The paradox tightens its grip. Suppose science advances to the point where we can replace every neuron in your brain with an artificial counterpart, one at a time. perfectly preserving your consciousness. When the last biological neuron is gone, and only synthetic ones remain, are you still you? Or have you been replaced by something else? Something that only thinks it is you? And if identity is so unstable, so vulnerable to gradual change, what does that mean for society, for nations, for cultures? Countries rewrite their laws, redraw their borders, shift their populations. At what point does a civilization cease to be what it once was? If an ancient empire, piece by piece, transforms over centuries, is it still the same empire, or has it died without anyone noticing? The paradox reveals a terrifying truth. There is no single moment of change. Just as the ship of Theseus never stopped being the same ship until it suddenly wasn't. Just as you never stopped being yourself until the realization dawns that you are no longer who you once were. Identity erodes quietly, invisibly, like waves wearing down stone. And so, we are left with an unsettling question. If nothing maintains its identity forever, if everything is constantly shifting, then what can we truly call real? Are we, like the ship, just illusions of continuity, fragments pretending to be whole, forever changing, yet forever clinging to the belief that we are the same? Or is identity nothing more than a story, a fragile, necessary lie we tell ourselves to keep from drowning in the endless sea of change? Imagine a being of absolute power, limitless, all-knowing, bound by nothing. A force that can shape reality with a mere thought, rewrite the laws of existence with a whisper. A being so powerful that nothing is beyond its grasp. This is omnipotence, the very essence of divinity, the ultimate authority over all things. But in the heart of such absolute power lies a question, a paradox so simple yet so devastating that it fractures the very concept of omnipotence itself. Can an omnipotent being create a stone so heavy that even it cannot lift it? If it can create such a stone, then there is something it cannot do. It cannot lift the stone. And if it cannot create the stone, then there is still something it cannot do. In either case, omnipotence is shattered, a contradiction lurking at its core. At first, the mind resists. There must be a way out, some clever trick, some overlooked detail that dissolves the contradiction. Perhaps omnipotence means only doing what is logically possible. After all, asking if an all-powerful being can make 1 + 1 = 3 is nonsense. But the paradox tightens its grip, because omnipotence isn't just about logic, it's about power without limit. And if an omnipotent being cannot defy logic, then logic is the true supreme force, standing above even the most powerful entity. But then, what if omnipotence includes the ability to break logic itself? What if the being can create the stone and still lift it, even though such a thing is impossible? Would this solve the paradox? Or would it simply render words meaningless? If omnipotence includes the power to make contradictions true, then nothing has any definite meaning. The very nature of reality would unravel. Cause and effect would lose their connection. Identity itself would collapse, for an omnipotent being could make itself both existent and non-existent at the same time. It could create a world where truth and falsehood are one and the same. And in such a world, does anything exist at all? But the paradox doesn't stop at divine power. It extends its tendrils into the very concept of control, of dominance over the world. Consider the idea of a ruler, an absolute sovereign who dictates every law, every action, every thought. Can such a ruler create a law so absolute that even they themselves cannot break it? If they can, then they are no longer free. If they cannot, then they were never truly all-powerful to begin with. The paradox exposes the fragile illusion of absolute control. Any power that is truly absolute must also be self-defeating. And then, the paradox becomes personal, because power, in any form, always reaches its limit. We strive for control over our lives, our futures, our choices. We seek to shape the world, to bend it to our will. But the more control we have, the more we realize what we cannot control. Can you make yourself forget something on command? Can you force yourself to desire what you do not desire? Can you control your own thoughts so completely that you can silence your mind at will? If power over the self is so limited, then what does that say about power itself? And if absolute power is impossible, even in theory, then what does that mean for the nature of existence? If no being, no force, no entity can truly be all-powerful, then the universe itself is bound by something greater than power. The paradox leaves us staring into the abyss, questioning the very nature of reality. If omnipotence is a contradiction, then does anything truly hold dominion over existence? Or is reality itself a fragile balancing act, forever trapped between possibility and impossibility? In the end, the paradox is not just about power. It is about the limits that lurk in everything, the hidden impossibilities woven into the fabric of what we assume to be infinite. And perhaps the greatest illusion of all is the belief that anything, any force, any being, any mind, can ever be truly without limits. A scholar sits at their desk, exhausted but triumphant, their life's work complete. The book is done, an intricate masterpiece of research, analysis, and insight. The scholar has spent years ensuring every fact is correct, every argument precise, every claim supported by meticulous evidence. And yet, in the preface, a single admission is made. Despite my best efforts, there are likely some errors in this book. A humble disclaimer, one found in countless scholarly works. But beneath its surface, something is wrong, something that gnaws at the very foundation of reason itself. The scholar believes every statement in the book to be true. After all, if they thought something was false, they wouldn't have written it in the first place. And yet, they also believe that some statements in the book are false. Otherwise, they wouldn't have included that disclaimer. How can both beliefs coexist? How can one rationally hold that all claims in a book are true, while simultaneously accepting that some are false? The paradox tightens like a noose. If the scholar is rational, then they must acknowledge the possibility of error. But the moment they do, their certainty collapses. This is the Preface Paradox, a quiet, insidious contradiction that lurks at the heart of knowledge itself. At first, it seems like a minor inconsistency, an issue of language or probability. But the deeper you go, the more it begins to fracture the nature of belief itself. Because this paradox isn't just about books, it's about everything we think we know. Each of us walks through life carrying a library of beliefs. We believe in the laws of physics, in the reliability of memory, in the existence of the world beyond our senses. And yet, like the scholar, we also acknowledge that we must be wrong about something. No human being has ever held a flawless, error-free set of beliefs. So if we accept that some of our beliefs are false, how do we know which ones? If you believe something, it means you think it's true. But if you also believe that some of your beliefs are not true, then you are, in a sense, admitting that your mind is unreliable. But if your mind is unreliable, then how can you trust any of your beliefs? The paradox spirals outward. We demand certainty in science, in logic, in history, in law, but certainty is a ghost, an illusion we cling to while secretly knowing it isn't real. Even the most rigorous scientific theories remain open to revision. Even the most precise measurements carry a margin of error. Even the most confident minds are forced to concede, I might be wrong. So what does it mean to know something? If true knowledge means being free of error, then no one has ever truly known anything. But if knowledge can contain errors, then how is it different from mere belief? Where is the line between knowing and simply assuming? And if no one can be certain of anything, then what happens to truth itself? The paradox infects even the foundations of logic. Consider a courtroom where justice depends on the assumption that facts can be determined. A judge delivers a verdict, believing it to be correct. But if they are rational, they must acknowledge the possibility of judicial error. Does this mean no verdict can ever truly be trusted? Or take history, where scholars piece together the past through documents, artifacts, and analysis. Each historical claim is supported by evidence, but each historian also admits that errors may exist. So if we are always forced to admit the possibility of error, does that mean truth is forever out of reach? And then, the paradox becomes personal. Think about your own life, your own past, your own memories. You remember childhood experiences, past relationships, critical decisions. You believe in these memories as part of who you are. But what if some of them are wrong? Memory is fallible. We misremember details, reshape events, even fabricate moments without realizing it. The rational mind acknowledges this. But if you accept that some of your memories are false, how do you know which ones? How do you know who you really are? And so, the Preface Paradox does not simply expose a flaw in books or academia. It reveals a flaw in reality itself. We live in a world where we must both trust and doubt at the same time. We must believe in knowledge while accepting that knowledge is imperfect. We must believe in ourselves while accepting that we too are fallible. There is no escape. There is no certainty. Only the quiet, unsettling realization that everything we know, everything we are, rests on a foundation of doubt, of a cold breeze sweeps through the grand marble halls of an ancient courtroom. The judge sits high upon his bench, his face carved from stone, his gaze unyielding. Below him stand two men, locked in a silent battle, not of swords nor of fists, but of reason itself. The first man is Protagoras, a renowned sophist, a master of argumentation. His words bend minds as easily as a blacksmith bends metal. The second man is his student, a young pupil hungry for knowledge, eager to learn the art of persuasion. But today, they are no longer teacher and student. They are adversaries, because between them lies a contract, a simple agreement that has spiraled into an impossible paradox. Years ago, Protagoras had agreed to teach the student the secrets of law and rhetoric. Payment would only be due if the student won his first case in court. If the student failed, he owed Protagoras nothing. A fair deal. A logical deal. But time passed, and the student, though well-trained, never brought a case to trial. Days turned to months, and Protagoras grew impatient. He had taught the student everything, yet no payment had been made, and so the master did something drastic. He dragged his own student to court. The charge? Breach of contract. The student stood before the judge, listening as his former teacher laid out his argument with surgical precision. Your Honor, the terms were clear. Payment is due when my student wins his first case. If I win today, he must pay me by law. If he wins today, then he has won his first case. Thus, by our agreement, he must pay me. Either way, he must pay, a brilliant trap, a flawless argument. Protagoras folded his arms, certain of his victory. But then the student smiled. He had learned well. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm, "my teacher's logic is flawed. If I win this case, then the court rules that I do not have to pay him. If I lose this case, then I have lost my first trial, meaning that, by our agreement, I owe him nothing. Either way, I do not have to pay." Silence. The courtroom, once filled with the murmur of scholars and spectators, had been strangled by contradiction. Both arguments were perfect. Both led to opposite conclusions. If Protagoras wins, the contract dictates that the student must pay. But by winning, he has ensured that the student has lost, which means the contract states that no payment is due. If the student wins, the court rules that no payment is required, but by winning, he has secured his first victory, which means he now owes Protagoras an endless loop. No answer. The judge, a man who had spent his entire life dealing in logic and law, found himself paralyzed, because this was not just a legal dilemma. This was a paradox that shattered the very foundations of reasoning itself. What does it mean to win a case if victory can nullify itself? What does it mean to lose if loss results in victory? And if two flawless arguments can both be true, while leading to opposite outcomes, what does that say about truth itself? The paradox spreads like a poison, seeping into every corner of human reasoning. If law, a system designed to bring order, can be broken by mere words, then how can we trust the concept of justice? If logic, the pillar of rational thought, can be twisted into self-destruction, then how can we trust the mind? And if a simple contract can unravel the very fabric of decision-making, then how can we trust reality? The judge, unable to find an answer, does something unprecedented. He refuses to rule. He closes the case, leaving it unresolved, because any decision would itself be a contradiction. But that is the true horror of this paradox, because justice, reason, and truth are built on the assumption that eventually answers can be found. That if we just think hard enough, if we just analyze with enough precision, we will arrive at a clear resolution. But this case has no resolution. It exposes a flaw in the system itself, a flaw that suggests the human mind, no matter how brilliant, may not be capable of grasping reality in its entirety. That for all our laws, all our logic, all our philosophy, there will always be cracks in the foundation, and some questions will never have answers. Imagine a donkey, a simple creature standing in a vast and empty field. The wind moves through its coarse fur, the sun lingers high above, and the air is still. But this donkey is no ordinary donkey. It has been placed at the exact center between two identical piles of hay, two equal distances, two equal choices. To the left, a bundle of golden hay. To the right, an identical bundle of golden hay. Both are fresh, fragrant, and perfectly equidistant from where the donkey stands. The donkey is hungry, starving. It needs to eat to survive. But there is no reason, none at all, to choose one pile over the other. No subtle difference, no instinctual pull, no preference. And so, the donkey stands still, paralyzed. A creature designed for survival, reduced to an agent of perfect logic. A mind locked in a silent battle with itself. A body craving sustenance, yet unable to act. And the longer it waits, the closer it comes to death, until eventually it starves. This is the paradox of Buridan's ass. a thought experiment that should not be possible. And yet, it challenges something fundamental about how we make decisions. Because in a purely rational world, in a world where every choice is based on logic alone, this paradox suggests something horrifying. That if there is no better reason to choose one option over another, then choice itself ceases to exist. That in the absence of a clear advantage, action collapses into inaction. That perfect reason leads to death. It is an absurdity, yet one that burrows into the very nature of decision-making. Because how do we decide? How do we choose between paths, between options, between futures? We tell ourselves that we are rational beings, that we weigh the pros and cons, that we analyze outcomes, that we make logical decisions. But what if two choices are truly equal? What if no amount of thinking can break the tie? What if we are standing in the middle, just like the donkey? Does something force our hand, or do we too become frozen? The deeper you look, the more this paradox infects everything. Governments, corporations, individuals. We are all bound by the same principle. If two policies appear equally good, which does a leader choose? If two job offers seem equally promising, which does a candidate accept? If two paths stretch before you, and neither stands out, which way do you walk? And in a world driven by automation, by artificial intelligence, by cold rationality, what happens when an advanced system faces this paradox? What if an AI, programmed to make the most logical decision, encounters two perfect choices? Does it seize up, unable to compute, a reason to pick one over the other? Does it enter an endless loop, frozen by its own logic? Does it, just like the donkey, starve itself into oblivion? But there is something even more unsettling lurking beneath this paradox. Because it suggests that, in the absence of irrationality, decision-making fails. It implies that the reason we are able to act, to move forward, to break ties, has nothing to do with logic at all. That perhaps behind every decision we make, there is something deeper than reason, something primal, something beyond calculation, a flicker of randomness, a spark of chaos, a whisper of instinct. Perhaps in the end, we are not rational beings at all. Perhaps our ability to choose is not a strength of logic, but a failure of it. And maybe, just maybe, that is what saves us. A prisoner stands in his dimly lit cell, awaiting his fate. He has been sentenced to death, but before he can prepare himself for the inevitable, the judge delivers an unsettling decree. You will be hanged at noon on a weekday, sometime next week. The execution will be a complete surprise. When the moment comes, you will not see it coming. A shiver runs through the prisoner's spine. But then, as the hours pass and the weight of his situation settles in, a thought takes root in his mind, a loophole, a way out. The judge's words contained a contradiction, didn't they? He begins to reason through it. If the execution is meant to be a surprise, then there is a flaw in the logic. Let's assume the execution doesn't happen Monday through Thursday. Then by the time Friday arrives, he will know that it must happen that day, because there are no other days left. But if he knows the execution will happen on Friday, then it won't be a surprise. And that contradicts the judge's decree. So Friday is impossible. He eliminates it from his mind. But now, something interesting happens. If Friday is no longer a possibility, then Thursday becomes the last remaining day. And if Wednesday, Tuesday, and Monday pass without an execution, then the prisoner will realize that Thursday is the only option left. And once again, That means it won't be a surprise. So Thursday must also be impossible. He follows this logic further. If Friday is ruled out, and Thursday is ruled out, then Wednesday must also be ruled out. Because if Monday and Tuesday pass, Wednesday becomes predictable. So Wednesday is impossible. Then Tuesday, then Monday. One by one, every possible day collapses in on itself. The execution is logically impossible. The prisoner laughs. He is free. There can be no hanging. But then, Wednesday arrives. The guards storm into his cell, drag him from his bed, march him to the gallows, and as the noose tightens around his neck, the prisoner is struck by a single, horrifying realization. He didn't expect it. It was a complete surprise. The paradox has consumed him. His logic was perfect, and yet it led him straight into the trap. This is the unexpected hanging paradox, a thought experiment that should not be possible. Yet it exposes something unsettling about how we think about logic, probability, and self-reference. At its core, this paradox forces us to ask, can knowledge of the future destroy itself? The prisoner believed that by knowing the nature of the execution, by knowing that it must be a surprise, he could logically deduce that it could never happen. But that very logic, when followed to its conclusion, blinded him to the truth, and that truth came anyway. Now step back. Think about all the times we believe we can predict the future. Stock markets, economic crashes, elections, revolutions. We tell ourselves that if we know what will happen, we can prevent it from happening. But what if knowing something makes it unknowable? What if the very act of predicting an event ensures that the event can never occur in the way we expect? What if our confidence in logic blinds us to reality itself? Governments, corporations, entire civilizations operate under the belief that certain disasters, certain outcomes, certain collapses will not happen because we have analyzed them, because we have reasoned them out, because we have proven that they are impossible. But what if our reasoning is a trap? What if the very act of proving something impossible is what makes it possible? What if the prisoner had never questioned the judge's words? Would he have been spared, or was his fate sealed the moment he tried to escape it? Because the deeper you look, the more this paradox infects everything. Wars that were logically avoidable, financial crashes that were predicted out of existence, civilizations that should have stood forever, but fell precisely because they believed they wouldn't. The lesson of the unexpected hanging is chilling. It tells us that our greatest illusion is the belief that we can think our way out of fate, that if we understand something deeply enough, we can escape it. But maybe, just maybe, the trap is already set, and the moment we think we've won, the noose tightens. Imagine this. A man sits alone in a dimly lit study, the weight of history pressing against his mind. His fingers tremble as he turns the pages of an old leather-bound book, an artifact of immeasurable significance. The text within holds knowledge, so profound, so absolute, that it has shaped the course of human civilization. And yet, the author is unknown. No records of its creation exist. No clues to its origins can be found. It has always been here. It simply is. This is the Bootstrap Paradox, a riddle so insidious that it defies our fundamental understanding of cause and effect. It begins with a single, unsettling question. Where did it come from? Not just the book, but anything. A person, a song, a scientific discovery, an idea. Where did it begin? The paradox emerges when we find something that has no origin, a loop of information, causality, or existence that seemingly sustains itself without ever being created. A man receives a book on how to build a time machine. He follows the instructions, builds the machine, travels back in time, and delivers the book to his younger self. Now stop, who wrote the book? It was never written. It was always there. The information existed in an eternal loop, passed endlessly between past and future. A song is heard by a man who travels back in time and teaches it to a young composer, who then grows up to write the same song. Who composed it? A scientist discovers a revolutionary formula, but before they can publish it, they are visited by their future self, who hands them the completed formula, written down. Where did the knowledge originate? Every attempt to trace it back leads only to itself. And this is where the trap closes. Because everything we know about reality hinges on causality. For something to exist, it must have been caused by something else. Every effect must have a cause. Every action must have a source. Everything must come from somewhere. But the Bootstrap Paradox exposes a crack in this foundation. What if something can exist without ever being created? What if some knowledge, some object, some event simply exists because it exists? Look deeper, because the implications of this paradox are terrifying. Consider human civilization itself, our art, our science, our philosophy. What if, hidden somewhere in history, there exists knowledge that was never truly discovered? What if we are standing on a foundation of causeless information? We assume that ideas come from effort, from research, from inspiration. But what if some of them have simply appeared? A whispered word from the future, a loop of forgotten origins, a self-sustaining illusion. Now think about yourself, your identity, your beliefs, your memories. Where did they come from? You remember learning things, ideas, facts, opinions, all absorbed over time. But what if a single, crucial piece of your identity was formed by something that was never truly created? An opinion inherited from someone who got it from someone else, who got it from someone else, who got it from nowhere. A belief passed endlessly through minds, never originating from a real event, but shaping the world nonetheless. How much of your reality is truly yours? Or are you living inside an information loop sustained only by the illusion of an origin? The Bootstrap Paradox whispers an unsettling truth. It suggests that some things, perhaps even the most important things, do not need a beginning to exist. And if that is true, then perhaps the greatest mysteries of our universe, life, consciousness, time itself, are not things that began, but things that have simply always been. The night sky stretches infinitely above you, a silent abyss littered with billions of stars. Each point of light could be a sun, a home, a world teeming with life. The universe is vast beyond comprehension. Trillions of planets, countless solar systems, and unthinkable expanses of time. By all logic, life should be everywhere, and yet it is silent. No signals, no signs, no voices calling across the cosmos. This is the Fermi Paradox, the disturbing contradiction between the high probability of extraterrestrial life and the absolute lack of any evidence. The numbers defy reason. There are at least 100 billion galaxies, each containing hundreds of billions of stars. Even if only a fraction of those stars have planets, and only a fraction of those planets are habitable, the sheer scale suggests there should be millions, if not billions, of civilizations. So where are they? Why, in all the vastness of the cosmos, has no one reached out? Perhaps we are alone. Perhaps Earth is the single improbable anomaly, a tiny, fragile spark of consciousness in an otherwise lifeless universe. But that thought is more terrifying than the alternative. It means we exist in an endless void with no one to witness us, no one to share in the mysteries of existence. But maybe we aren't alone. Maybe they are out there, watching, waiting. There are theories, each more unsettling than the last. The first is the Great Filter. It suggests that somewhere along the evolutionary path from simple life to advanced civilization, there is an almost insurmountable barrier. A point that few, if any, civilizations ever cross. If the Great Filter is behind us, we are incredibly rare. We have survived where others perished. But if the Great Filter is ahead of us, waiting like an inevitable doom, then every civilization that has ever reached our level of advancement has been destroyed before taking the next step. By war. By technology. By something we cannot yet comprehend. Then there is the zoo hypothesis. It proposes that we are being watched, studied, but never contacted. To them, we are ants on a cosmic sidewalk, too primitive to interact with, too fragile to be exposed to the truth. Perhaps there is a galactic order, an unspoken rule to leave us untouched until we are ready, or perhaps they are already here. Silently, woven into our history, our myths, our unexplained phenomena. Perhaps they are so advanced that we cannot recognize them, like an insect incapable of comprehending the human world around it. Then there is the dark forest hypothesis, the most terrifying of all. It suggests that the universe is not empty, but full of civilizations, each one silent, hiding, afraid to speak. Because in a dark forest, every creature is a potential threat. The moment you make a sound, you reveal your location. And in a universe where survival is the only rule, any intelligent species that announces itself risks immediate extermination. So perhaps they are out there, billions of them, and they have learned one unshakable truth. Stay quiet, stay hidden. Trust no one. But if that is true, then we have already made a fatal mistake. We have been shouting into the void for decades, sending messages, launching signals, begging for someone to answer. And maybe someone has. Maybe the silence isn't the absence of life. Maybe it is the presence of fear. So as you look into the night sky, consider this. Are we alone, or have we simply been spared? For now. Imagine standing inside a sleek, futuristic chamber. The walls hum with an eerie energy, and a panel before you flashes with a countdown. 5 seconds until activation. You volunteered for this experiment, knowing it could change the course of human civilization forever. Teleportation. Instantaneous travel across vast distances. You feel a strange unease. Not fear exactly, but a quiet whisper in the back of your mind, asking a question you can't quite put into words. The machine activates, a blinding flash engulfs you, and for a moment you are nowhere. Then, you open your eyes. The room around you is identical, but something is different. It is no longer Earth. You are now on Mars. The scientists cheer, celebrating the first successful teleportation of a human being. You step out of the chamber, your body feeling intact, your memories clear. You are still you, right? But then the lead scientist turns pale. He stares at the screen, his face draining of color. You follow his gaze. And there, back on Earth, inside the original teleportation chamber, is another you. The experiment was never about sending you to Mars. It was about copying you. The machine scanned your body, molecule by molecule, recorded the precise arrangement of every cell, every neuron, every electrical impulse in your brain. Then it rebuilt you, atom by atom, in a new location. But what happened to the original you? Back on Earth, that version of you is waking up, terrified. The scientists there had a choice: deactivate the original body after the copy was made, or let it live. They chose the latter. Now there are two of you, and here is where the horror sets in. Are you the original? Or are you just a perfect replica, convinced you are the same person? What if, in another version of the experiment, they had destroyed the original body the moment the copy was created? Would that have been a painless death, or an execution master's progress? And if you were destroyed, would you ever know? This is the Teletransportation Paradox. It forces us to ask, what does it truly mean to be you? Is it your body, your mind, your continuous experience of existence, or are you nothing more than a pattern? Consider sleep. Every night, your consciousness fades, your awareness vanishes into nothingness. Then, in the morning, it returns. But how do you know you are the same you as yesterday? If the teleporter killed the original and created a perfect copy, would the copy be any different from the you that wakes up each morning? Would you cease to exist, or would you simply continue, uninterrupted? Now take it further. What if the teleportation machine didn't just transport you across space, but across time? If it scanned you today, stored your pattern for 1,000 years, and then rebuilt you in a distant future, would you have died for that 1,000-year gap? Or would it simply feel like you closed your eyes and woke up in another era? And what if the machine didn't just make one copy? What if it made 10, 100, 1,000? Each one of them waking up, believing they are the real you. Which one is, or is the very question meaningless? The teleporter exposes an unsettling truth, that perhaps our sense of self is an illusion, that you are not a single, continuous being, but a fleeting moment, a pattern that can be interrupted, copied, or destroyed without ever truly being lost. And if that is true, then what are you, really? A body, a memory, a thought, or just an idea, existing only for as long as you believe? It does. You wake up, and the sky is still blue. The ground is still solid beneath your feet. The laws of physics still apply. Gravity still holds you down, the sun still rises, and time still marches forward, just as it did yesterday, just as it has always done. But how do you know it will continue this way? It's an absurd question, right? After all, the sun has risen every morning for as long as humanity has existed. The seasons have changed in their cycles. The rivers have flowed, and objects have fallen when dropped. It has always been this way. So why should tomorrow be any different? You take another breath, but this time, a strange unease grips you, because something doesn't sit right. David Hume, one of the greatest philosophers of all time, exposed the fragile foundation upon which our entire understanding of reality rests. He called it the problem of induction. Induction is how we learn. We observe patterns in the past and assume they will hold true in the future. We expect the laws of physics to remain constant because they always have. We trust that the sun will rise tomorrow, not because we know it will, but because it always has before. But here is the problem. Past experience does not guarantee future truth. Imagine a turkey on a farm. Every morning, the farmer comes and feeds it. Day after day, without fail. The turkey learns to trust the farmer. The pattern is clear. The farmer arrives, and food follows. The turkey assumes this will always be the case, until one morning, the farmer arrives with a knife. That one event shatters the pattern. The past was no predictor of the future. The turkey had relied on induction, and it had been fatally wrong. Now ask yourself, how do you know you are not the turkey? What if the universe itself is operating on the same principle? What if every physical law, every constant, every certainty you've ever known is just an assumption based on an unbroken streak? And what if, one day, that streak ends? What if, tomorrow, gravity stops working? What if fire suddenly turns cold? What if time ceases to flow in one direction? We assume such things are impossible, but only because they haven't happened yet. But why should nature be bound by our expectations? Imagine a machine flipping a coin. For 1,000 years it lands on heads, again and again. Would you bet your life that the next flip will also be heads? What if, after 1,000,000 flips, it still only landed on heads? Surely, by now, the pattern is undeniable, and yet, if the universe has no inherent rule forcing that streak to continue, there is nothing stopping the next flip from coming up tails. Now expand this to everything. The very foundations of science, the laws of motion, causality, chemistry, even mathematics, are built on induction. We assume electrons will behave tomorrow as they do today. We assume energy cannot be created or destroyed. We assume cause and effect will hold, that events will follow rules, but we cannot prove that they will. We take for granted that our memories and experiences reflect an objective reality. But what if they don't? What if your past is nothing more than a hallucination, a fabricated sequence of events that never actually happened? How could you prove otherwise? The problem of induction is a crack in the very fabric of our understanding. It tells us that no amount of past evidence can ever prove the future. We live in a world of fragile assumptions, trusting that reality will not betray us. But what if one day it does? What if, like the turkey, we wake up to find that everything we believed in was an illusion, shattered in a single moment? And if that day comes, would we even see it coming? Or would it already be too late? Imagine you are standing at the precipice of time itself, staring into the past. In your hands, you hold a key, one that allows you to step through history and alter the very events that led to your existence. The air hums with possibility. The past is no longer untouchable. It is moldable, breakable, and, perhaps, destructible. You have a mission. You step through time, arriving decades before your birth. The world is unfamiliar, yet eerily connected to you. You seek out a man whose existence determines your own, your grandfather, and you kill him. The moment he draws his last breath, you feel a strange sensation ripple through reality. A paradox is born. If your grandfather never lived to have children, then your parents were never born. And if they never existed, then neither did you. But if you were never born, then who traveled back in time to kill him? A loop with no resolution. A cause with no effect. A contradiction that time itself cannot reconcile. This is the Grandfather Paradox. A simple, yet devastating rift in logic that tears at the very foundations of cause and effect. But let's step back. You don't have to be a killer to unravel the fabric of time. Any action in the past, no matter how small, carries the weight of infinite consequences. What if you merely prevented your grandparents from meeting? What if you whispered a single, Word that altered the course of history just enough to erase yourself from existence? You would vanish. But then again, the paradox strikes. If you disappeared, then you never traveled back to interfere in the first place, which means history should remain unchanged, which means you should still exist, an endless cycle, a logical contradiction that refuses to resolve. Some theories try to escape this trap. Perhaps the universe corrects itself. Maybe, no matter how hard you try, events conspire to ensure your grandfather survives. A sudden gust of wind spoils your aim. A twist of fate leads your grandparents to meet regardless of your interference. The past resists change, or perhaps reality fractures. The moment you pull the trigger, a new timeline branches off, one where you never existed. But the original timeline, where you did, continues elsewhere. Two separate worlds, two separate realities, neither of them truly negating the other. But even this solution is unsettling. If every action spawns infinite branching timelines, then where does that leave you? Are you truly in control of your fate? Or are you merely a passenger in an ever-diverging multiverse, where every choice you make already exists in another form, in another reality, where another you stands in your place? And if that's true, what does you even mean? The grandfather paradox is not just a problem of time travel. It is a dagger aimed at the heart of identity, causality, and free will itself. It asks the most terrifying question of all. If time can be rewritten, then does anything we do truly matter? Or are we merely echoes in a reality that is always one step away from erasing us? You awaken in a dimly lit room, your mind clouded, your memories fractured. The air is still, the walls are bare, and the only certainty is the unsettling knowledge that something is being done to you. You remember agreeing to an experiment, but the details are slipping away, dissolving like a dream that vanishes the moment you open your eyes. A voice breaks the silence. It is calm, clinical, devoid of emotion. You have been awakened. You blink, trying to recall what happened before. This moment, the voice continues. You are participating in a simple experiment. On Sunday, you were put to sleep. A fair coin was flipped. If it landed heads, you were awakened once. Today, on Monday. If it landed tails, you were awakened twice. Today, and again on Tuesday. After each awakening, your memory of it is erased. You will never remember if you've been awake before. A pause. Then the final chilling question. What is the probability that the coin landed on heads? Your mind begins to race. It seems obvious at first. A fair coin has two sides, heads or tails. A simple 50-50 chance. But something feels wrong. A deeper contradiction lurks beneath the surface, hidden just beyond the grasp of certainty. If the coin landed on heads, then this is the only time you will awaken. But if it landed on tails, you could be experiencing either of two identical awakenings. You have no memory of any previous one. Right now, in this moment, you could be experiencing Monday or Tuesday, and there is no way to tell the difference. Yupamki, try to reconstruct reality. The experiment's rules suggest that for everyone awakening under heads, there are two under tails. If you are experiencing an awakening at random, shouldn't that mean you are twice as likely to be in a world where the coin landed on tails? Shouldn't the probability shift from 50% to 33% for heads and 67% for tails? But how can probability change after the fact? The coin has already been flipped. Shouldn't it still be 50-50, and yet something gnaws at you? If you knew, somehow, that this was Tuesday, you would instantly know the coin had landed on tails. But if you are on Monday, you are still trapped in uncertainty. And the worst part, No amount of thinking can tell you which day it is. The past has been erased. The present has no markers. The future is unknowable. Your sense of reality begins to unravel. You realize that probability is not just a number. It is tied to information, to knowledge, to perspective. The moment your memory was erased, your ability to determine the truth was severed. You exist in a space where logic itself begins to blur, where even a simple question, "What are the odds?" becomes a doorway to an existential abyss. And then the voice speaks again. You will now be put back to sleep. The world fades to black, and when you awaken again, the question returns. Has this already happened? Are you still trapped in the cycle? Or have you just begun? Imagine standing in a vast, empty hall. The ceiling stretches endlessly above you, the walls fading into the distance. In your hand, you hold a single piece of paper, a ticket. Around you, thousands of others stand in silence, each clutching their own ticket. The atmosphere is thick with anticipation. A voice echoes through the space. Neither human nor machine. One of you will win. The rest will lose. The words are simple, undeniable. The rules of the game are clear. You know that there is a winning ticket somewhere among the crowd, and yet a thought creeps into your mind. Your ticket will not win. It seems like a safe assumption. After all, the odds are staggeringly low. If there are 1,000,000 participants, your chances of holding the winning ticket are microscopic. 1 in 1,000,000. So small that it might as well be 0. In fact, everyone here can make the same claim. My ticket will not win, and they would all be justified in believing it. Yet one of them must be wrong. The contradiction hangs in the air like a silent scream. If everyone is justified in believing that their ticket will lose, then logically, no one should win. And yet someone must. Your grip tightens on your ticket as the paradox deepens. Rationality tells you that it is reasonable to believe you will lose, but rationality also tells you that someone will win. And if you apply the same reasoning to every person in the hall, the contradiction becomes unbearable. Certainty fractures. The rules of probability, once so rigid, now seem fragile, bending, under the weight of the paradox. The very concept of reasonable belief starts to disintegrate. If it is rational to believe that your ticket will lose, then how can the collective conclusion that no one wins be false? How can a belief be rational and yet lead to an impossibility? Your heartbeat quickens. You feel the weight of the contradiction pressing down on your thoughts. What does it mean to know something, to believe something? If every single person here is justified in thinking they will lose, then isn't rationality itself flawed? And then the voice speaks again. The winner has been chosen. A hush falls over the crowd. You look down at your ticket. It is not the winning number, just as you suspected, just as was reasonable to believe. And yet, somewhere in the hall, one person stands frozen, staring at their ticket in disbelief. Their belief was just as rational as yours, but it was wrong. You feel the ground beneath you shift, as if reality itself has betrayed you. If reason can lead to contradiction, then what else can you truly trust? The crowd begins to dissolve, each person vanishing into the void one by one, and then only you remain, clutching a ticket, knowing it will lose, yet unable to shake the fear. What if this time the paradox chooses you? You sit in a dimly lit classroom, the ticking of the clock filling the silence like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. The professor stands at the front, his gaze sweeping over the room with an air of quiet amusement. He clears his throat and speaks. Sometime next week, there will be a surprise exam. Your classmates exchange glances. A surprise exam? What does that mean? The professor continues, his voice unwavering. You will not know the day of the exam until the moment it begins. It could be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. But when it happens, it will catch you completely off guard. A murmur spreads through the room, a ripple of unease, but then a realization dawns. A loophole, a contradiction hiding in plain sight. One student, emboldened by logic, raises a hand. Sir, the exam is impossible. The professor smiles. Is it? The student nods, confidence growing. Yes, consider Friday. If the exam hasn't happened by Thursday evening, then Friday is the only possible day left. But if we know for certain that it must happen on Friday, then it's no longer a surprise. That contradicts your statement. The professor remains silent, allowing the logic to settle. The rest of the class leans forward, intrigued. The student continues. Now, if Friday is impossible, let's consider Thursday. If we reach Wednesday night and the exam hasn't happened yet, then we'll know for certain that it must be on Thursday. But again, if we know it's coming, then it's no longer a surprise. So Thursday is also impossible. A growing wave of realization spreads through the room. The argument continues to unravel itself. If Thursday and Friday are ruled out, then by Wednesday night we'll know the exam has to be on Wednesday. But that means Wednesday isn't a surprise either, and using the same logic, we can eliminate Tuesday and Monday as well. So the exam cannot happen at all. Silence. The professor simply watches, letting the weight of the paradox settle into the students' minds. It seems airtight, unshakable. The students sit back, satisfied that they have cracked the puzzle. The exam, by its very nature, is self-defeating. It cannot happen. And then, Tuesday morning. The professor enters the room with a stack of papers. Without a word, he begins distributing them. The realization hits like a punch to the stomach. The exam is happening, and no one expected it. The contradiction twists like a knife in your brain. How? The logic was flawless. The argument was airtight. And yet, here you are, staring down at the test paper. The paradox does not care for certainty. It lures you in, wrapping you in the comfort of logical reasoning, only to shatter it when you least expect it. The moment you believed the exam could not happen, it became possible. You grip your pen, heart pounding. The professor watches, the same quiet amusement in his eyes. You understand now. The greatest trap is the one set by your own mind. In the heart of a small village, nestled between endless stretches of fields and forests, there exists a peculiar rule. A decree so simple, yet so devastatingly contradictory, that it binds the town in an inescapable loop of logic. The village has only one barber, a man known for his precision, his unwavering adherence to the town's one and only grooming law. He shaves every man in the village who does not shave himself, and he does not shave anyone who shaves himself. At first glance, it seems straightforward, almost mundane. Every man falls into one of two categories: those who take the razor to their own beards, and those who rely on the barber's skillful hands. The balance is perfect, until one question is asked: who shaves the barber? The moment the words leave your lips, reality begins to fracture. The rule states that the barber must shave all men who do not shave themselves. If the barber does not shave himself, then by the village law, he must be shaved by the barber. But he is the barber, which means he must shave himself. But the rule also states that he does not shave men who shave themselves. If he shaves himself, then he is in the category of men who do shave themselves, and therefore he is forbidden from shaving himself. He must shave himself. But he cannot shave himself. He cannot shave himself. But he must shave himself. The contradiction loops endlessly, a thought spiraling deeper into the abyss. The barber, a seemingly ordinary man, becomes an impossibility. He exists and yet does not. He shaves and yet cannot. You try to escape the loop by altering the scenario. Perhaps there is a second barber, one who shaves the first. But no, that would simply shift the paradox onto him. Perhaps the barber does not have a beard, but then how does he fall within the rule at all? No matter how you try to resolve it, the logic bends back upon itself, like an Ouroboros devouring its own tail. The barber stands in his shop, razor in hand, his reflection staring back at him from the mirror. Does he lift the blade to his own face, breaking the law? Or does he lower it, defying the command that governs his entire existence? Perhaps he does neither. Perhaps he is frozen in time, trapped in an eternal paradox, unable to act yet unable to escape. And then a thought slithers into your mind, uninvited and deeply unsettling. What if you are the barber? What if you have been caught in a paradox of your own making? A contradiction so insidious that you have never noticed it before. You think back to every decision you've ever made, every belief you've ever held. How many of them, when pushed to their limits, begin to contradict themselves? How many rules in your life crumble under scrutiny, revealing an abyss of logical chaos beneath? You stare into the mirror, your own reflection looking back. Who shaves the barber? Who shaves you? You wake up one morning, stretch your arms, and decide to get out of bed. It feels like a choice, one entirely your own. But was it? If every decision you make is the result of prior causes, your genetics, your upbringing, the chemical signals firing in your brain, then could it have been any other way? Could you have truly chosen differently? Or was your choice an illusion, an inevitable conclusion drawn from countless variables beyond your control? You walk to the kitchen and pour yourself a cup of coffee. Did you choose coffee? Or was it chosen for you by the sum of your past experiences, by a habit formed over years of mornings just like this one? The paradox of free will is ancient, yet no closer to resolution. At its core is a contradiction so profound, so unsettling, that it threatens to unravel the very fabric of our identity. If free will exists, then we must be able to make choices independent of any external influence. But if every choice has a cause, if every action is the result of some prior event, then those choices are not truly ours. Determinism looms over us like a shadow. It whispers that the universe is a vast, intricate machine, where every effect is preceded by a cause, and every moment is simply the unfolding of what was always meant to be. In this view, your choices are not choices at all. They are inevitabilities, illusions woven into your consciousness by forces you cannot control. But then, if we are mere puppets of cause and effect, who or what is pulling the strings? Perhaps you reject determinism. Perhaps you insist that we are free, that we can break the chains of causality and act without being bound by the past. But if our actions are not caused by anything, if they are entirely spontaneous, without reason or precedent, then how can they be meaningful? A decision that emerges from nothing, without any basis, is not a choice at all. It is randomness, a roll of the cosmic dice. And randomness is no more free than determinism. So we are left in a strange, impossible space. If our actions have causes, we are not free. If they do not have causes, they are meaningless. The paradox is absolute. The more we struggle, the deeper we sink. You think back to every moment in your life where you believed you had a choice. That one time you decided to take a different path home. The time you picked one book over another. The moment you fell in love. Were any of those truly yours? Or were they always going to happen exactly as they did? And if you could go back, knowing what you know now, could you have ever done anything differently? Or would the same forces, the same neural patterns, the same causal chains pull you toward the same outcome over and over again, like a story already written? The room around you feels smaller now, as if the walls themselves are closing in. Because if free will is an illusion, then so is choice. So is responsibility. So is everything that makes you you. And yet, you could stand up right now, walk outside, make some absurd, senseless decision just to prove this entire argument wrong. But even then, what drove you to do it? A thought? A reaction? A deep-seated need to rebel against the constraints of logic? Was that choice free? Or was it determined by the paradox itself? The answer is slipping through your fingers like grains of sand. And in the silence, a final chilling question echoes in your mind. If you are not the one making your choices, then who is? Somewhere, in the vast landscape of thought, a single sentence lurks like a trap, waiting to be sprung. It is simple, unassuming, yet devastating in its implications. You read it, hear it, speak it, and suddenly, the ground beneath reason crumbles. This sentence is false. At first, it seems like a harmless statement, just another arrangement of words. But then the contradiction unravels. If the sentence is true, then what it claims must be correct, meaning it is false. But if it is false, then its claim that it is false must be untrue, making it true. The paradox tightens like a noose. It resists classification, defies resolution. It exists in a liminal state, neither true nor false, an impossible contradiction that should not be, but is. You try to escape it. Perhaps the sentence is meaningless, just a trick of language, an error of logic. But no. The structure is clear, the meaning unmistakable. It asserts its own falsehood, and in doing so, entangles itself in an endless loop. You attempt to break it down, analyze it, find some flaw in its construction, but with every attempt, it only tightens its grip. The more you fight it, the deeper you fall. And then, the deeper horror sets in. Truth and falsehood are the foundation of reason itself. Every logical system, every argument, every calculation depends on the idea that a statement must be one or the other, that a thing cannot be and not be at the same time. But here, in this single paradox, that certainty collapses. The rigid walls of logic, built so carefully over centuries of human thought, reveal a crack. And through that crack, chaos seeps in. Because if logic itself can be twisted into contradiction, then what else can be trusted? You begin to see echoes of the paradox everywhere. Every declaration of truth carries its own uncertainty. Every belief rests on fragile foundations. Language itself, the very tool we use to define reality, becomes suspect. And if reality can be questioned, if even truth can betray us, then what remains? Somewhere in the back of your mind, you hear a voice whisper, "This sentence is false." And, for a moment, just a moment, you wonder, have you ever really known anything at all? This final paradox is not just a logical contradiction. It is an existential dilemma that threatens to unravel the very fabric of thought itself. It is a paradox that lurks beneath every question, hidden in the foundation of every belief. To understand it is to risk becoming trapped in an endless loop, a question that devours all answers. You have been following this journey through paradoxes, each one bending reality in ways you had not considered before. Your mind struggles to make sense of them, to reconcile contradictions, to find a stable ground. But ask yourself, can you ever truly know anything? If every thought is built upon another, if every belief is a structure supported by assumptions, then how can there ever be absolute certainty? The world you perceive, the logic you use, the reasoning you trust, are they truly real, or merely limitations of your own mind? Now, consider this contradiction. If you come to know that you know nothing, have you not just gained knowledge? If you claim, I know nothing, does that not contradict itself? And if it is true that you can never know anything with certainty, then you cannot even be certain of that statement itself. It is a self-consuming loop, an intellectual abyss that does not justify logic. It threatens to erase the very foundation upon which logic is built. If all knowledge is based on assumptions, and if every assumption is simply another layer of perception, then what is real? Is your mind truly thinking, or is it merely simulating the illusion of thought? Now take this one step further. You have heard this paradox. It has now entered your mind. And once a paradox takes root in thought, it cannot be easily ignored. Every time you attempt to grasp certainty, this paradox will whisper from the depths. But how do you know? And if this question cannot be answered, then perhaps it is not just knowledge that is uncertain. Perhaps it is reality itself. You have wandered through a maze of contradictions, each paradox unraveling the very fabric of logic, truth, and existence. You have questioned time, identity, causality, and the limits of human understanding. And yet, after all of this, after peeling away layer upon layer of reality, what do we arrive at? A final, unshakable truth? No. Only another paradox, the illusion of certainty. We humans crave certainty. We seek patterns, conclusions, definitive answers. But what if certainty itself is nothing more than a comforting lie? What if our need for resolution is just another trick of the mind, another paradox waiting to be unraveled? The greatest irony is this. The more we chase truth, the more elusive it becomes. Think about it. Every paradox you've encountered has exposed a flaw in reason itself. Time loops upon itself, identity dissolves, logic contradicts, and reality warps under scrutiny. So, in the end, how do you know that anything you believe is real? How do you know that your thoughts are even your own? Perhaps everything you hold as self-evident is merely a construct, a fragile illusion designed to keep you from staring into the abyss of the unknown. But here's the real question. Can you live with that uncertainty? Can you embrace the idea that some things may never be resolved, that existence itself may be a paradox without an answer? Or will you retreat back into the comfort of logic, even knowing that logic itself is flawed? This is your final choice, not between truth and illusion, but between acceptance and resistance. You can try to escape this paradox, but even that is a paradox, because the moment you try to escape, you confirm that you are trapped, and that, in the end, is the final, inescapable paradox of the human condition. Welcome to the edge of reason. The question is, will you take the final step, or will you turn back?